Welcome, listeners, to www.ironradio.org, the website and podcast for all things strength sports and sports nutrition. With your hosts, Lonnie Lowery.
Remember, Phil is like a gnarled old oak tree held together with scar tissue and bone spurs.
Rob Fortney.
And I'm telling you, the pain that I would suffer was beyond excruciating.
And Phil Stevens.
Do it, Rob. You'll kill all those nerves.
Thanks for listening.
Welcome, Iron Radio listeners. This is Lonnie Lowery. I am an exercise physiology and nutrition professor of about 20 years, and I'm a former competitive bodybuilder.
And this is Phil Stevens. I'm back. Sorry I was gone. I was in Vegas and then California and all over the place. I'm traveling like Mike. Anyways, powerlifter, owner of Strength Yield, strength coach, yada, yada, yada.
Nice. This is Dr. Mike T. Nelson, creator of Flex Diet, faculty member at the Kerrigan Institute, and a bunch of other stuff. And it's my last day in South Padre, Texas today, so hopefully it's windy and I can kiteboard.
Right on.
What's up? Mike Israetel. Used to be a professor, and now I am just an explorer, man. I'm just kidding. I'm the chief sports scientist at Renaissance Periodization. I do all kinds of stuff, which I'm sure we'll get into later. But for now, I'm just happy to be here today.
Cool.
Thanks for being on.
Okay, let's start with a mail question that I promised everyone about last week. We needed Phil really to do this here because it's perfectly up his alley. This is from Max. He says, hello, my name is Max. I've been listening to Iron Radio for about a year now. I'm 28 years old. I was diagnosed with arthritis about 6 months ago. My doctor told me that I have joint degeneration in my mid and lower spine as well as my hips. Regardless of the diagnoses, I still want to compete in powerlifting, essentially. I'm looking to compete in the next couple of months, definitely by the end of March 2019. I am currently 180 pounds in body weight. I have a 365 one-rep max in the bench, a 405 squat, and a 365 deadlift. Do you guys have any pointers on pushing my maxes over the next couple of months? I have a very solid routine, but I feel like I have hit a brick wall. My goal is to get a 405 raw bench by the end of December. And again, he's at 365 now, to get my squat and deads up to 495 in the same time frame. And again, he's in that upper 3s to 4 range right now, and he wants 495 by the end of December. Let's see. I've been using 5-3-1 method to really push my strength over the edge. My diet is solid. My supplementation is solid. My body is very receptive to changes. I feel like I'm in a perfect position to keep a low body weight but still push incredible weights regardless of my disability. Any advice you guys have would be greatly appreciated. Any resources you could refer me to will be used 110%. Thank you, Max. What do you think, Phil? Yeah.
The thing that jumped out to me is we need to add 265 pounds to your total in a month while keeping you at the same body weight or lower. Ooh. We have problems.
That's a tall order. Yeah.
Now, that's next. I mean, I'm not going to say it's impossible because weird things happen, but that's next to impossible. Let's address the arthritis. I mean, I think it's doable. I deal with clients I have a client that almost has the exact thing he's dealing with right now, and you just have to adjust your training. I can say with the arthritis and things like that, you're going to have to, especially in the spine, you're going to have to concentrate on every rep being perfect. For us, when we do that, when we're talking volume, I keep volume in lower rep sets, so we get volume across more sets than we do instead of a set with a bunch of volume, because what you tend to see is, and if we're doing 10 sets of 2 instead of 2 sets of 10, we can make those 10 sets of 2 look perfect, whereas there's a much bigger case of like rep 8 or 9 or 10 starting to not look so perfect, and you have no margin for error with an arthritic spine. So I would control your volume and make sure everything's perfect as far as reps go. You'll have to do that more so than everybody should do that, but you more so because of what you're battling. And volume on those joints that are already just wore out. So yeah, that's like me with my hip. I know, like I go into squat today, I have about 10 heavyish reps. total from about 80% up, and that's all I'm going to have for the day with my hip.
Oh yeah.
So I have to make all those count,
Right.
And that's probably something you're going to have to deal with too, because after that things just start to ache, in a way that's just not helping me. So you'll have to be very, very conscious of that, getting your training nailed down perfectly, I guess. I mean, and figuring what that perfect is for you. I know with me I can make progress on heavy 3s and 5s and 1s. And then I get my volume in with things that don't kill my joints too much. So, but
yeah.
Other than that, man, 40 pounds in a month to a bench, that's a pretty tall order. And same thing with 100 pounds and over 100 pounds to a deadlift. I mean, I think it's doable in time. I wouldn't be so tied into, if you really want those numbers, I would get untied to needing to be in the same weight class. Because the fastest way to add some of those pounds is going to be adding pounds to your body weight, if that's your real goal. If your real goal is I just want those numbers, then start eating.
Yeah.
But the problem with that is you're going to start eating, and now you have even more daily impact on those already arthritic joints. So he's battling a number of things. I mean, I'm not going to say it's not possible. I think it's doubtful that you can hit those by the end of December. Now, can you hit those by the end of next year? Yeah, probably, with correct training and figuring it out. So
I'm wondering, we are sort of in the middle of a series of picking Phil's brain on adding 20 pounds to a specific lift, like in a day, sort of a technique discussion, not a promise, but an exploration of doing that. Maybe there are some technique issues. And again, it's hard to know that, right, without you actually watching him. Because I've seen you do some very cool things with just talking about like resistance arms and stuff in the deadlift, or getting flat against the bar in the squat. I mean, I learned a lot of cool stuff from you, and kind of brought up memories of kinesiology class, And so there could be some things like that might be good for a quick jump here with Max as well.
Yeah, for sure. But we can't address those at all because I can't see anything that's going on.
Right. That's what I'm saying. Right on.
So
yeah, you're talking about true
that
strength.
might be a thing that he can do, is reach out to, if he has somebody near him, they can just address form issues if he has any, or hire a coach and send videos. So
yeah, okay. Mike, let's bring you in on this one. The arthritis thing. I know he says his supplementation is perfect, but sometimes that's a perception. I think perfect, or saying very solid. Maybe you're not always completely aware of what's available. Do you have any thoughts about joint support, anti-inflammatories, or collagen, or glucosamine? Really anything that might be supportive of his joints. I'm guessing he's not really advanced arthritis because he's 28 years old. But it could be some kind of very extreme version. Again, like Phil, I not seeing him, I don't know. So maybe some nutrition or supplements for joint support. Are you a fan, or?
Yeah, I think there's some that are okay, although I'd say the data on pretty much all of them is very mixed. And even glucosamine chondroitin is, I'd say 50-50-ish. Some people respond well to it, some people don't.
Yeah.
One that I've used anecdotally that seems to work pretty good, and I don't have any relationship with them, is called actistatin. It was a specific type of glucosamine chondroitin, and they had some other things in there to help with inflammation. I initially bought it as an equine version before they had the human version. Just because it was a lot cheaper, and people who were using it were doing horse racing, which we talked about in the past as always an interesting thing to look at for performance, because horses probably don't have much of a placebo effect compared to us humans. So I've used that one in the past. That's seemed to help, and with that I noticed a difference in a couple weeks. So it's not like you have to take it for 2 months to see any difference. Standard things like fish oil probably can help. Things that might modulate inflammation, possibly curcumin, things around that. I also would look at total dietary intake, especially fruits and vegetables. I've just noticed in myself and other clients, if their fruit and veggie intake is real low, that they just tend to report creaky joints and just not feeling quite as good, which obviously makes sense with all the micronutrition and everything else in there. Mm-hmm. That's probably where I would look at to start. And then kind of like what Phil was saying, I would make sure and have some way of him logging the cost of his training, whether that's just a daily 1 through 10 self-report, joint pain scale or something, so that he doesn't get too far down the path of, ooh, this is really painful. Ooh, I'm not really sure if this is the best route of progress. And that I like people to decide ahead of time kind of what cost are you willing to pay. And there's no right or wrong answer. But, for me, I'm kind of a wuss with pain. I don't really like any pain from training per se, especially if it goes on more than a couple days other than just standard muscle soreness. But some other people may be like, I don't care. I'm fine if it gets up to a 5 out of a 10 scale or even a 6.
Yeah.
But I think having that clearly defined ahead of time and tracking that, just because I've seen too many lifters get down the path of, well, I added 10 pounds and my pain went from a 2 to an 8. Oh, I hate my life.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, yeah. I mean, that's something I had to address with my hip before it was replaced. Yeah. And I wasn't dealing with a back like he is.
Yeah.
And I was dealing with hey, it's going to hurt. You can keep doing it. You can't hurt it more than you can. So it was like, okay, well, I'll deal with an 8 or a 9 or a 10.
Yeah.
But I knew it wasn't going to further harm me.
Right. Yeah.
It was just going to be pain. But you're dealing with an arthritic back. Yeah. I don't like dealing with backs, man.
Oh, I know, right? And he's young. You don't want to end up destroying your back, so by the time he's 39 years old, he's, in a real mess.
Yes.
Hey, you know what? For what it's worth, you guys are mentioning pain. I was at a functional movement screen seminar kind of thing with some students midweek, and we're going through some of these different movements, and I'm thinking, oh, that seems, that's very reasonable. I can do that, and I can do this, and then one of them said, well, pain is a guide. If any of these have pain, then your score is very low. Essentially, it's the lowest score. I said, then I just went from like an B+ to an F, all right, because I hurt just standing here. So I don't know. It's interesting though when pain, like to Mike's point, how tolerant are you of pain, and how much of that is just something that's gonna be there because you're in the middle of a multi-decade chronic condition versus something you don't want to worsen with what you're doing in the gym. So okay.
Do you have any thoughts on this, Dr. Israetel, while you're on here?
Yeah, I think all of the stuff you guys have said is really spot on, and I'm just not a real big fan of what I would call Napoleonic goals. I've had them before myself. I think maybe we all have, but goals that seem, what is it? I think Phil said was, not impossible in the technical sense, but anything but. And I guess so. So the goal is that this total is supposed to increase in 1 month. Is that my correct understanding?
Roughly, yeah.
And do we have any information on this individual's training age total? How long have they been?
No, yeah, just biological age, yeah.
Yeah. Man, even for a rank beginner, that kind of increase is really, like, if I see someone in their first several months of training at those strength levels at all that he's talking about, it's already impressive. If they gain that much, this is somebody who's going to end up being one of the best powerlifters in the world.
Oh, yeah.
But if they've been training for any longer than a year, I mean,
he has
almost complete.
Yeah, I'm sorry. He did say he just says a couple of years. Yeah, over the past years, he says. So.
I would say I'd be willing to bet a considerable sum of money that this is completely out of the question to gain this much. And sort of for the point, I think that once you are a really experienced lifter or a very experienced coach, and you have mapped a trajectory of your own or of your athletes' ascension rates in terms of strength, to me, you could have plans like, okay, I think it's reasonable to go 10 kilos on squat, 7 kilos on bench, 5 kilos on deadlift, so on and so forth, because of the trajectory we've had, because we know how this person responds to training, so on and so forth. But I think outside of those pretty rare circumstances where your monitoring is very good, what I like to do instead is to simply follow a very good plan, to have very good auto-regulated feedback, and to just do the best. To do the best you can, because if you do a good plan, then you just get what you're going to get, right? We can all say, well, I've got a plan that I think I'm going to total 2,000 pounds more, and somebody else could say, well, use the exact same plan, an identical twin, and hope for just 1 pound more in their total. Both people are probably going to get 30 pounds on their total, right? So like this conception of I want this much more, I think is a little bit, maybe not needless, but maybe distracting from the real issue of, hey, listen, he says his supplements are good, his diet is good, his training is solid. You got nothing to worry about. Just like I think as Mike said, develop some kind of sort of tracking understanding of how much pain you're experiencing, know when to back off and when to push it, and then just do your best. And then don't worry about all the numbers. They'll put themselves together, because all you have power of is the intervention. And then the result of that intervention is sort of out of your hands. It's a matter of physiology and the interaction of your training with that.
Yeah, I think, not to beat this to death, but I think there's a sort of a case of diminishing returns. It looks like Max is sort of an intermediate lifter. And he said what he says, or what he calls hitting a brick wall, I might call just, you're out of the beginner phase, bro. And you're not going to make tens of pounds gains in every lift every month. You're probably, I heard something recently about when it comes to like becoming excellent, like the philosophy or the psychology of excellence. It's sort of like people tend to move from getting a lot of satisfaction from variety and large reward, and then they start to actually get satisfaction. You have to retool and become satisfied with nuance, like sometimes I use Phil as an example in class when we talk about training principles, that Phil will fight all year long, and it'd be a huge win just to get 10 pounds on an already very big deadlift, something like that. And he's not going to be expecting 40 pounds on his deadlift every 6 months, like continuously with no plateau, so. Okay. All right. Because of our guest, I'm going to sort of table the news, except to say two things.
Strength and muscle sport news.
One, listeners, please go check out last week. I want you to take to heart. I speculated a bit on muscle tendon health, Mike, if you remember. We were just talking about that. With the information I had, and it wasn't bad advice, but on further analysis, let's put it this way, I think that study was a little bit more focused on muscle, because they kept talking about the muscle tendon complex, and I think we might have overemphasized the tendon part when it comes to like nutrients and big eats and how they drive, the muscle tendon complex and that sort of thing. So it may have been a little bit more on the muscle side than on the tendon side. I just think that was their nomenclature, right? Talking about the muscle tendon complex, but basically meaning muscle strength. But having said that, nothing we said was wrong, but that's why we give it the reference. I just encourage everybody to go read that stuff. And then lastly, just some special thanks. The Fall Funds Drive is underway, and Michael and Merrick, thank you guys. Those sorts of fall donations, they help keep us on the air, as we approach episode 500. I mean, we are 4 episodes away from the 500 mark. It helps us decide how long do we want to keep doing this, and, can we pay for the server come January, stuff like that. So it's much appreciated. Okay, Dr. Nelson, let's get some cool background info.
Yeah, so give us some background there, Dr. Israetel, on how you kind of got into training, how you ended up going to do a PhD from a very well-known figure in the field, and how you got to where you're at now.
Sure, thanks. So I started out in high school wrestling, kind of by accident almost. A friend of mine was on his way to wrestling practice, and I just wanted to hang out. And I was like, hey, you want to hang out? He's like, oh, I'm going to wrestling. And I was like, oh, all right, I'll just join you. And I ended up wrestling for 4 years in high school, and it was there that I was introduced to what you could call physical culture, right? Because prior to that, I had liked physical activity in sports just fine, but wrestling was, you had to win, so you had to sort of try to organize your life, nutrition, recovery, training around some kind of principles in order to get better victory percentage. And then for wrestling, I started lifting weights to try to get stronger, because it was very apparent that getting stronger was going to make me better. And I ended up going on a real big journey with lifting weights in high school that ended up in college. I kept lifting weights, but I no longer wrestled. And I went through a bunch of different majors and stuff in college until I realized, like, gee, I'm getting real serious about lifting. I started competing in powerlifting, and I just became obsessed with the idea of becoming stronger. And I switched my major to kinesiology. I ended up doing a master's program at Appalachian State in strength and conditioning, basically, and interned with sports teams there and did some research in the lab. And then I went to New York City for a year to be a personal trainer, realized that I still needed to know a whole lot more for my own personal satisfaction. And at this point, I was becoming more interested in hypertrophy and muscle size and maybe competing in bodybuilding. So I decided to enroll or to apply, and then I got in to Dr. Mike Stone's PhD program in sport physiology at East Tennessee State. And those were 3 years of some of the most learning I had ever had in my life. It was unbelievable. As soon as I got there, within the first week, I realized that I just didn't know any sports science at all. I wasn't sure what it is that I had been learning the entire time. Dr. Stone actually literally asked me that. Like in class, he would volunteer answers, and I was real good at the physiology stuff, and he would ask me sports science stuff, and I was just like, I have no idea what you mean by that. And he was like, how come you don't know any sports science? And I was like, well, I guess that's why I'm here. So I learned sports science and finished my PhD. And at the time, I started competing in bodybuilding. And then because of my expanding knowledge in nutrition, I got to have a role with the Olympic training center that we had at the site, in which I consulted the weightlifters on just basic nutrition around training, and helping them make weight classes. And during this time, my friend Nick Shaw and I had some clients in New York, and he had stayed in New York and been a personal trainer. And I was writing nutrition for some of his clients that he was doing training for, and I was at a distance. So it got kind of tiresome for him to refer to me as, well, this is my friend Mike, because it's kind of weird. Here's my friend to do nutrition. The colleague sounds a little better than that. And of course, I had clients who I was doing nutrition for that were referred to me in New York City by other people, and they had never even met me, so they were working with me online. They liked it, and then they would say things like, well, my trainer tells me to do this and this and that, and I think he's wrong. And I'm like, yeah, well, he's definitely wrong. And they're like, maybe I should have a better trainer. Do you know any good trainers in the city? And I was like, well, there's Nick Shaw. And again, I got tired of being like, they're like, well, who's that? I got tired of being like, well, it's my buddy. So we started a company called Renaissance Periodization, where we just really committed to the scientific approach to training and nutrition, especially at that time that we were together for a year in New York City. There was like a huge, it was still the case, like a huge guruism going on. People would literally come up to us in the gym and ask us like what program we were doing. And we're like, what do you mean? They're like, well, whose program? What name does it have? Who is the guy that made it? And we were like, well, it's just periodization. And they're like, what's that? And I was like, oh my God. Does it have to have some dude's name? Does it have to have a commercial name? And then so we got really tired of that. So we decided we're going to try to help the fitness industry in our own little way by just cutting out all the BS. So I ended up, we started RP when I was still in PhD program. I finished that. I became a professor in University of Central Missouri. That's where I met another friend of mine, Dr. Jen Case. She had been a very high-level grappler at that point. And when I got to my interview, I found out that she was very good at jiu-jitsu, and I was like, hey, I'm actually really tired of doing walking cardio for bodybuilding. It's just getting old. I might try some cardio through jiu-jitsu, and I used to wrestle. Can I start jiu-jitsu? Can I go to your jiu-jitsu school with you when I start the job in August? And she's like, yeah, sure. Like 50 trillion people always say they're going to start stuff like this, but never do. So she was actually really surprised when I texted her like 2 days after I moved in August. And I was like, hey, we still doing jiu-jitsu? She was like, oh yeah, okay, yeah, sure. I didn't know you were serious. So we started doing Brazilian jiu-jitsu, and I ended up falling in love with that, and I have been doing that for 5 years now. My job ended up taking me to Temple University in Philadelphia. And then last year, Renaissance got so big finally that it was just really kind of, I wasn't the best use of my time to go back to being a professor anymore. So myself and some of my colleagues left academia, and I just do full-time RP, which means I sit at home and do stuff on a computer. Same job, except I don't get to talk to anyone anymore. So thank you for talking to me today. So I just do that, and I train a bunch, and I compete in bodybuilding occasionally. So far, not so good at it, but I'm getting better. And actually, I'm quite successful in jiu-jitsu. I'm a professional grappler now, which sounds cool to say. And that's where I'm at. So
nice. And I do have to ask, how was the jiu-jitsu for cardio? I've heard very interesting stories from large mammals such as yourself who start to do jiu-jitsu.
Yeah, totally. So at first it was just brutal. I would say that from a technical sense, and since this is the kind of show that we can talk about that stuff, the caloric burn to fatigue ratio is not great. Like the caloric burn to injury probability ratio is not great. So every now and again, people will message me and say, "Hey, I'm bodybuilding and or powerlifting, and I want to throw jujitsu in for cardio. What do you think?" I'm like, "I think that's a terrible idea because it's going to get you hurt, at least some pains and aches here and there, and it'll get you injured every now and again. Probably not in a serious way, but it sure as heck doesn't help." And then it also just the level of cumulative fatigue that it adds is really quite high. But it does burn a lot of calories, but the trade-off isn't good. So I would say if you really want to burn calories, incline walking on a treadmill or a slow jog or the elliptical even better. Those are all really great. Very low injury risk, very low fatigue ratio to a higher calorie burn. But jiu-jitsu is, it's people ask like, can I do strongman for cardio? And it's like, yeah, go ask strongman if that's a good idea. And you talk to strongman, and they're like, I do as little of the events as possible to try to get better because they will just break you down. And is strongman really great for cardio? Yes. Is jiu-jitsu great for cardio? Yes. But the trade-off of injury, et cetera, is not there. So you got to love it for what it is and sort of take the pain on the chin.
Got it. And last question, and then we'll get into the topic of the day, but is there anything in general you miss about teaching in a formal academic situation compared to now kind of teaching more in the, I don't want to say real world, but there's a big difference between the private sector and academics. And we have people who listen to the show on both sides of the spectrum. So I always like to ask people who have been in both situations, kind of their experience and the pros and cons of each one.
Yeah. Well, there's plenty of cons in academia. I suppose I can just touch on them for a little bit and then talk about at least one big pro that I miss. The cons are that it's by no means clear that all the students you have in class are there to learn. I'm not exactly sure why a lot of university students go to school. I'm sure you guys have been in that situation. Or like, I understand you're in my class. I don't know what it is you're trying to learn, if anything. If I simply just assigned A's at the beginning of class, I'm pretty sure 90% of the people simply would never return to lecture. Mm-hmm. So that's kind of a weird thing. The bureaucracy is not super fun, and so on and so forth. And just the level of interest in what you're saying is not that great. What I do really miss about formal instruction, and there are avenues which to do this in the private sector, but they're much more limited, is the ability to really take your time and do a foundational brick-by-brick instruction of a topic to where at the end of a whole semester, you can truly say you taught someone the training principles writ large. You taught them what they are. You taught them where they're derived from. You taught them how to apply them. You taught them how to troubleshoot them because you had the time, session after session, class after class, to really get in depth. People pay pretty good money for a seminar, right? When you folks like such as yourself and myself go and give a talk. The talk could be an hour. The talk could be 4 hours. It could be 2 6-hour days. It could be a week. But you guys know as well as I do that there is a level of completeness of thought that is simply intransmittable through that kind of form. Like if you really want to learn something, it's got to take weeks, probably months. And again, in an academic setting, what you can do is pile one course on top of the other, on top of the other. So by the time someone graduates 4 years from a really well-designed collegiate program, there's just no replacement for that depth of knowledge. And I can I can mostly tell when you're speaking to someone with an academic background in the field versus someone who's really been interested and done a lot of seminars, because there's a completeness of thought there and a holistic understanding that is irreplaceable from really putting in the time. Can you put the time in yourself and just read books and audio books and lectures? Yes, but it's going to take as long as a college degree to do. There's something really special about really diving in that seminars and stuff like that can't do. I don't know what you guys think about that, but that's been my opinion.
Yeah, Lonnie and I talked about this too, and I know Phil's talked about it a little bit also, that I cringe when I sometimes talk to someone who, on the one hand, exactly what you said, I applaud them for taking the seminars and doing the extra effort, which is way more than most people would ever do. But it's hard because a lot of times the basics and the foundation is just not sexy. And when you're talking to them, you'll realize they made a massive leap from like A to B, but they didn't really know they made a massive leap, and that's what kind of scares me a little bit. It's like one thing to speculate and say, okay, we went out on a limb here, and here's what we kind of skipped over. But when you just skip over stuff and don't realize it, it's like, ugh, makes me cringe.
Yeah, it's really interesting, especially when people will ask you questions at various points, and maybe after the seminar or just later when they message you online. They ask you a question that you think that the question itself is preposterous, given that you thought this person was already up to par in what you taught them, right? Like you'll talk about the training principles, and you'll talk about how to program design for powerlifting, for example, and they'll be like, hey, what do you think of this program? And you're like, what? This program is awful. Like, why would you ever ask that? And you realize, wait a minute, they have like a list in their head of good programs. They didn't have that program in their list, so they don't know. And then they have just this very general understanding of what's a good and bad program, but it's not a foundational enough understanding to just straight up cut out a huge swath of programs as inadmissible in court. And the only way you get that understanding is a real intimate understanding of the training principles, and that just takes time. And then it kind of stinks because they're sort of forever going to be susceptible to, oh, this new program came out. What do you think of it? It's like, well, gee, if you really want to know, you got to put in the time to get the education to really know yourself automatically what's a good program and what's not. There's no replacement for in-depth study for that.
We'll take a little break here, and then we'll get into the topic of the day, which is a perfect segue there for programming for hypertrophy.
Good stuff.
I can't stop feeling. Some of us don't understand how lucky we are to be living in this land.
Hi listeners, this is Rob from Fortress Fortney. I'm here to remind you that as the holiday season approaches and your thoughts turn to giving, we like you to keep Iron Radio in your thoughts.
Over the past several years, there have been hundreds of listener comments hoping that Iron Radio stays on the air for years to come. Iron Radio is here for you. But as with any public radio type format, the show is listener supported. That's where you come in. For just $4 a month, you become a supporting member, keeping your weekly dose of education, experts, and gym talk flowing. Just go to www.ironradio.org and click on the $4 monthly subscribe button near the bottom of the page.
Or click the donate button at the right of the page for a one-time donation. You are the Iron Brotherhood and Sisterhood.
Of course, not everyone can afford to be a supporting member or a significant one-time donor, but for those of you willing to pitch in, $4 per month or $50 just once, we're about to sweeten the deal. Become a supporting member or major donor between now and January, and a limited number of you will receive a gift worth over $20. And we will never forget our existing supporters. Simply email me via ironradio.org, and I'll send you a free seminar from Dr. Lowry on how to significantly and realistically boost your testosterone levels. Help your iron brothers and sisters who cannot pitch in but deserve better internet programming in our sports. And happy holidays.
Hey listeners, this is Dr. Lonnie Lowry. If you've ever had anyone critique you on your protein intake as part of your weightlifting lifestyle, oh, you poor meathead, all that extra protein is going to rot your kidneys or weaken your bones or dehydrate you or give you gout or who knows what. There is a book available. You could simply Google CRC Press and Lowry. And what I've done is reach out to experts all over the world and create a book, a single compendium that you can hold up and say, this is why I consume extra protein. This can be very valuable when you're being quote-unquote educated by various professionals on the topic. There's an enormous amount of literature in this book on the safety, the effectiveness, how protein works in cells, the history of protein and weight trainers, much more. So again, please check out CRC Press and Protein and Lowry. You can just Google that, and I do, full disclosure, I do make a small single-digit royalty on the book, but that's not why I did it. I did it so we can all have something, our particular population, to both defend what we do and to inform our nutrition and our eating. Thanks. Iron Radio is, of course, primarily a podcast. But over the years, there have been technical glitches calling for backup streaming and listeners who wanted the convenience of other sources of audio content. Toward this end, Iron Radio is now simulcast and backed up on YouTube. If needed, please search Lawnman07 or Iron Radio from within YouTube. There's not much video, but if you like to listen through YouTube on a Roku or other living room device, there you go.
Like your weekly fix of Iron Radio? In addition to being a popular institute on iTunes, we are also on email. Simply go to www.ironradio.org and sign up for the voluntary email. You'll get a once per week email, no more. That's little more than the show notes and a link to the audio. So go for it.
Hey, we're back here on Iron Radio. It's Dr. Mike T. Nelson, Dr. Lonnie Lowry, Coach Phil Stevens, and we've got Dr. Mike Israetel from Renaissance Periodization on here. And we're going to talk about training and program design for hypertrophy, which is a topic that comes up a lot. And I guess we were talking before the break about principles. So what would you say, Dr. Mike, are kind of your big principles? So if we want to try to be more foundation based with looking at any training program, what would you include as kind of those key principles for hypertrophy?
Sure. Yeah, I think if we were to restrict ourselves, because there's some really key principles and then there's some other principles that may be a little bit more extra credity. The ones that account for the largest variance in results are, number one, specificity. Number two would be overload, and number three would be fatigue management. And those principles are actually identical in their names and basic designs for strength training, and probably for most other sports. The way in which they're applied for hypertrophy training is a little different. So specificity basically says, is your training tailored to grow muscle as opposed to do a trillion other things that might not be exactly what you want? So some people will do a powerlifting program and say, is this going to get me jacked? Well, yeah, to some extent, absolutely. But it's not specifically designed to do that. And when you look through your program, the real easy way to test specificity is to point to any part of it and ask a question. Does this feature directly grow muscle, or at least train an underlying system that will eventually grow me muscle? If the answer is no, bad news, you're violating specificity. It's as simple as that. Next is overload, which is a two-part definition. One is training that you're doing on average within a maximum threshold. Is it within the overload threshold? Is it challenging to your physiology? If you can do 5 reps of a dumbbell curl and you potentially could have done 25, is that really overloading? It's not, right? So then you have a problem where you're not really using your training time very effectively. And then the second part of overload is the progression aspect of, is your training getting harder with time? So training has to be difficult, and it also has to increase in difficulty over time if you're going to be successfully getting as much muscle as you can. And then, of course, fatigue management is a principle that's kind of like a damn it, like we have to have this principle. Ideally, we wouldn't. If we were super crazy alien physiology, we would never accumulate fatigue. It wouldn't be a problem. But the thing is, it's literally a rule in physiology that any process that is overloading enough to stimulate gains is also going to be causing enough fatigue to where that has to be dealt with. And fatigue is a cumulative phenomenon. It adds up over days, weeks, and for sure months if you make it that far without addressing it. And you have to sort of do something about fatigue fundamentally at certain time frames and always be aware of it, because you can't just train super hard all the time. You need some training breaks every now and again, some lighter sessions, so on and so forth. And within that context, you also have to make sure your general recovery all the time is good, which means sleep, nutrition, so on and so forth. So those training principles, if you look at a training program, you can ask, okay, is this program specific to putting on muscle? Okay, yes, check. Okay, is this program sufficiently overloading, and is it progressive? Yes, check. And then does this program have features about it, forget even diet and training, just in the program itself, that attempt to deal with the concept of cumulative fatigue, that understand that the body is a system that has limits in its adaptive ability, limits in how much training it can recover from. If you check that as a yes, gee, you got a pretty good program on your hands, and the rest is details that matter, but they only account for maybe 10 or 20% of the variance in program effect. If you have the big three in place, you're off to a real good start.
Do you find that people tend to be overly focused on the details initially and kind of just leave out one of those entirely?
Oh, yeah, of course. So they'll focus on other principles that they might not even know have names, like the SRA principle, stimulus, recovery, adaptation, is a principle that basically codes in training frequency, right? It says that, okay, when you stimulate a muscle, it recovers and adapts, and then you re-stimulate it again. And people are sort of obsessed with the time courses. Like, do I train biceps every other day? Is it every day? Is it once a week? And the entire time they'll just forget fatigue management exists altogether or not know. It's interesting because frequency you could answer, knowing nothing about training, you could be like, oh, how often do I need to train? It's a question anyone can ask. But cumulative fatigue is a principle that you may not even know exists until you run headfirst into it. And you go, there's something's happening here. I seem to want to apply the overload principle, but something just every 4 weeks, I seem to just fall apart. I remember when I used to train back as an undergraduate, I didn't even know fatigue management existed. What I would do is I was doing multiple set to failure programs all the time. Like every single set was to failure, multiple sets per session, multiple sessions per week. And after 3 weeks, I hit the same wall every single time. And I just couldn't figure out why. Like, I would squat 315 pounds, and I would get like roughly sets of 10. I would squat 325 pounds, get roughly sets of 10. I would do 335, and I would get roughly sets of 10. And the next week, I would try 345, and I would get like 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. And I was like, what happened? Like, maybe I could get sets of 8 at least. And what happened was I had basically accumulated enough fatigue to exceed the most volume my body could recover from in a given time. And then that fatigue spilled over and degraded my ability to perform. And that's what you would call auto deloading, which is when you get so weak from too much fatigue, you can't overload. So by definition, you're deloading. so that's a very injury risky way to do deloading, and it's not the most productive. Eventually, I sort of learned more to realize, okay, I know when my fatigue is going to be higher. I'm going to either through auto-regulation detect it and then take some easy training to recover, or I can pre-plan it pretty well if I know my body enough. And through the combination of those two things, I can actually know when to back off instead of just running into a wall every single time. Yeah,
I think all lifters can kind of relate to that in general. I mean, I know when I started lifting, it was such a debacle, and it was so bad that at the gym in college, the guy running the gym there, after about seeing me show up every day, I literally did the same routine, I think, every day for 5 days in a row.
That's awesome.
After the second week, him finally pulled me aside and be like, hey, buddy, you may want to try to do something different. And I'm like, but if I'm trying to get better at this thing, shouldn't I just be doing it as much as possible? And he's like, well, how's that working for you? I'm like, not very well. Yeah.
That's funny.
When you set stuff up, is there ways you mentioned pre-planning, so is there kind of a general, I know it's going to vary, but template for, kind of push hard or add more volume for X amount of time and then kind of back off? Like, what does that kind of look like from a high level?
Totally. And I think the concept of repetitions in reserve can guide us pretty well with that. So, you want to start out with something that's challenging. I guess I can put it in a technical sense. Your program should probably start, or a mesocycle of your program, a 1 to 3 month progression, should start at the very bottom of the overload threshold, which means the volume you're doing in total should be close to your minimum effective volume, like the least volume you can do and still make gains. When you start down there, your reps in reserve, right, how far you're pushing it before you hit failure on every rep on average, should start at the lower end of the effective range. We know through some pretty decent research now that that's like roughly 4 or 5 reps in the tank. Because if you think about it, like, if you do 6 reps in the tank for every set, it's just like an extended warm-up. And if you go straight to failure, boy, you accumulate fatigue really asymmetrically to how much you accumulate fitness, right? If you train to failure all the time, you're going to go, especially as a more advanced athlete, 1 or 2 weeks, and then you're just going to be like, I can't keep going like this. My literal performance can't keep up. It's just going to start getting degradation. But something like, let's say 4 reps in the tank, you're getting a good, just a bare minimum hit good stimulus, but the fatigue accumulation is not super crazy. So then you start at that volume, you start at that reps in reserve, and you can add training variables to that, add dosing, either in the form of weight on the bar or number of sets that you're doing, just to sort of pure volume, week after week after week. And as you add those variables, we could get more detailed about which one, and what ratios you probably want to add them for hypertrophy versus strength, because there's something to say there. But as you add those, add more and more training, you're automatically, if your performance is going to be stable and you're going to keep either performing a little better or not performing any worse, as fatigue accumulates, your repetitions in reserve are going to go down. So maybe the first, let's say we're talking about a relative beginner intermediate who is making really good gains, has really good fatigue management. Maybe your first 2 weeks of the program, because you're adapting to the training very well, you're going to be roughly 4 reps in reserve, even though you're adding sets and adding weight on the bar. Weeks 3 through 4, it might get a little tougher. You may be doing 3 repetitions in reserve on average if you're trying to, add a little weight to the bar, add some more sets, but not like repetitions drop, for example. And then, weeks 5 and 6, you might be like, 2 reps in the tank. Week 7 and 8, you might be like 1 rep in the tank. And then week 9, you basically start hitting failure and can't match your reps anymore. You don't have to make this prediction, but you will learn to make it, is that week 10 will be a giant unmitigated disaster if you try to do it. You're doing the most volume you've ever done, the most weight you've ever done, and you're hitting 1 rep away from failure or actual failure itself. Like, next week's probably not going to go so well. Now, you could try it and probably should earlier in your career to see what that tastes like, and then realize that it's when you hit those really high fatigue levels and high exertion levels, next week, it's a good idea to deload, maybe cut your volume and intensity by 50%, not get within 5 reps of anything, of any failure. Eat well, sleep well, really relax, let the fatigue come down like crazy. And then in the next week, you start your next mesocycle where you reassess where your minimum effective volume is. You pick weights and intensities and repetition ranges where you're again 4 reps or so away from failure, and you start the ascension, or what in sports science is called the accumulation phase, again, and you do sort of repeat the same thing. You could do the same exercises, potentially every 2 or 3 of those mesocycles. For beginners, it's a little less often. You alternate exercises, you switch them in, switch them out. Maybe you've been doing a lot of hack squats, you replace with leg presses, and you start another accumulation phase, and that's basically the real core of how that training would work.
Very cool. Do you use a lot of reps in reserve, Phil, or how do you program that for your lifters?
How do I measure reps?
Do you use like a reps in reserve, or do you use bar speed, or what do you use?
We'll use like a rate of exertion.
Okay, RPE.
I want you to go to an 8. Like right now, me and several of my lifters getting ready for a meet. Most of our weeks are calling it at about an 8 intensity, and I'm usually watching that and calling it for them. I kind of know what an 8 looks like. It's still gonna move. It's not going to be ugly. It's going to move pretty crisp, but it's not going to be easy. But I know they got a couple reps in the tank. So, and that's why I tell them an 8 or a couple reps in the tank. So we use that a lot, and then usually every 4th week or so, we'll unhinge that a little bit if things are going well, and then we'll back it back down. So, you just can't push the envelope all the time with anybody above, pure beginner. I mean, beginners are like, you can just throw it at them, and then next week they're automatically stronger. So,
you know what? If I can interject really quick, I think it's a super valid point that only beginners can really survive a sort of constant barrage. But I also think it's worth noting that beginners are precisely the individuals who you may not even because they can handle it doesn't mean they should be subjected to it. Because as Phil, I'm sure as you know, beginners are the most likely to make huge technical errors as they approach failure or as they approach high fatigue levels. And at that point, you're not only setting them up for needless beginner injury. I mean, if you're getting hurt as a beginner, I have no idea how you think you're going to be doing as an intermediate and advanced person, right? Like, if you're getting hurt as an advanced person, you're just welcome to the sport, right? But, as a beginner, you don't want to start accumulating injuries that early if you can avoid it. And, of course, as you're approaching failure and stuff, you start to break down your technique, you're actually learning to do the lift because you're doing repetitions with that technique in the technical motor learning sense. You're learning to do the lift wrong. It's the worst thing in the world when you and I'm sure you guys have been through this, you inherit a beginner/intermediate lifter from someone else, so they coach with someone else or just by themselves, and you're like, "What? Show me what a deadlift looks like," and they just tear acid off the floor, and you're like, "Oh, okay, well that's not a deadlift, so we're just going to relearn that." And they're like, "Well, you're saying I have to use 100 less pounds on the bar?" I'm like, "Yes, your life has been an illusion," and it's a process which you have to actually throw away the concept of overload for a while to seek technical perfection. And boy, you're sort of quote unquote wasting 3 months of their training career, but you're not wasting it. It's like time you're getting back, which is so just because you can push it crazy as a beginner, it doesn't mean you should. As a matter of fact, you probably shouldn't.
Yeah, my little trick that I would do in my garage if I had some of those people, especially more in the past, is I'm like, all your deadlifts now, so they don't look like a pooping dog, are done with a double overhand grip on a 2-inch axle that doesn't revolve. Because if you can't hold on to that thing, you're not going to come up with it. So it's much harder for you to screw it up because it just won't go anywhere.
Yeah.
So, but they hate that. So but my lifts are like hundreds of pounds less. I'm like, yes. Cool. Switching gears a little bit more towards the nutrition side, I know we've talked about training. Any of your kind of top principles you see for nutrition? And I guess the follow-up question to that is, kind of how prescriptive can you even be with nutrition, at least in the U.S.?
Yeah. Well, so I think that the principles in nutrition that rank top 3 for exerting themselves on muscle growth is number 1 would be calorie balance. Like if you're not eating enough food to gain weight or at least maintain your weight, at the very least, you're just not going to be gaining a whole lot of muscle unless you're in a real extenuating circumstance. So I think a lot of people who weigh 140 pounds ask, how do I get jacked? And the answer is not weigh 140 pounds anymore. and the only way to do that is to eat more calories than you burn, which for some people is challenging. And, you guys have been around the block more than once. You know that some people are like, oh, I can't eat this much food. Like, well, you're just not going to be big then. I don't know what to tell you. So you got to make sure to eat plenty of foods. Calories, number 1. Number 2 is a very close second, is a sufficient intake of the macronutrients, proteins, carbs, fats, but with hypertrophy specifically making sure to check that protein box, right? And yes, it's probably better to have more carbs than fats because carbs potentiate training and growth better. You have to have some fats, sure, but carbs are valuable, but protein is just, it's literally the raw material of muscle growth and is the most anti-catabolic of the nutrients. So protein around 1 gram per pound-ish, just in that ballpark, especially when you start with people just starting out for muscle growth. Like, I just want to see that you're trying to eat protein. I remember catching during hypertrophy phases, I used to coach, strength coach at Sports Science for volleyball, and I would catch the volleyball girls walking across the dome, the competition center that we were all in, and I would catch them and be like, what's that in your hand? And they're like, it's my lunch. And I'm like, what is it? And they're like, it's a bagel with potato chips and an apple. And I'm like, get the hell out of my sight. And they just hang their head down like, where's the protein? So, I don't like to, especially with beginners, people starting out, I don't like to throw numbers at them unless they're receptive to that. A lot of people, if you start with a computer scientist as a client, they're like, numbers, give me numbers. I'm like, oh boy, well, you're in luck. Here, we got all the numbers, don't worry. But for people just starting out, just try to consistently take in fist-sized portions of protein, for God's sake. And then you will get jacked, because a lot of times I've seen this, especially with athletes like track and field and stuff like that, they just won't eat any measurable amount of protein, but I'm actually comfortable using the term waste so much time in the gym trying to get muscular to no avail because they're simply not supplying, the amount of protein that you need. And then lastly, and I mean lastly in the very technical sense that it has the least effect, is something like how much your nutrient timing is being paid attention to. And it doesn't need to be crazy, but I think for hypertrophy, sort of at least 3, but preferably 4 to 5 meals a day, roughly evenly spread throughout the day. You're just not spending a ton of time not eating food, and the protein dosing and just the general food bolus should be roughly pretty similar, right? So you got a decent breakfast, decent lunch, decent dinner, decent late night snack. All of them have protein. You're getting enough calories. You're off to a pretty good start. Can we get more nitpicky than that? Oh, totally. But I think if you don't have those things in place, that's where I'm going to first to try to fix your nutrition.
Awesome. And then I know obviously you help run a company that guides people with, training and nutrition. Any thoughts on, do you write it kind of as a rough template, or in terms of, I hate to use the word prescriptive because obviously we're just guiding people with, health parameters. We're not trying to cure their diabetes or kidney function or anything like that. But any thoughts? Because I get this question a lot, and I know Lonnie gets it all the time. I'm sure Phil gets it. I did a whole certification, and I had people who did it, and they're like, "Oh my God!" But I'm so afraid to mention the word protein to a client because then they're going to think I'm being prescriptive. I'm like, well, I think you went a little too far on the other end of the spectrum. But you get people who go too far on the other end of the spectrum from that too.
Well, I'm very comfortable saying that our company cures all diseases with its products. So buy them now. We're super comfortable being prescriptive because we are the end all. We're trying to start a religion too. It's going to be great. On a serious note, so at our company, we actually have probably close to half now of our coaches are registered dietitians. Nice. So they are, in the legal and technical sense, able to be completely prescriptive, but they almost never are because and it's interesting. Some folks come, it's like, I'm sure doctors deal with this kind of thing all the time, where patients come in and say, I want this. This is what's wrong with me. And the doctor has to be like, hold up. Let's actually find out what's going on and then give you the recommendation that medicine would. I think a lot of people do that in diet. One thing I've seen people do, and I'm sure you guys have run into it, is you give people a guideline of like, try eating this much protein per day, right? That's not a prescription, it's a general recommendation. And here are some foods that fit that category, like chicken breast, turkey, vegan products, eggs, and you give them a list of maybe 10 foods and say any other foods are good as long as they fit the general template here. You do that with carbs, fats, so on and so forth. And a lot of people will say, well, can you just tell me what to eat? The thing is like exact food by food plans are almost always, not always, almost always awful because people just don't understand how much momentum they're going to lose by eating the same stuff all the time. Like people, like literally, we have like one of our best-selling products at RP is diet templates, which basically do exactly what I just described. They give you amounts, they give you meals, and they let you go free ball with the food, but they make some good suggestions and good, healthy muscle-building foods. And people have some of the feedback we get, which is pretty rare, but some people are like, oh my God, this got so many options. Can you guys just tell me what to eat? And it's like, that's not going to work. You won't be able to do what we say for any longer than about a week until you just quit. And they're like, no, I swear I could just eat chicken breast and broccoli. It's just like if you offer me turkey and kale, I just have like decision fatigue and I won't be able to do it. Like, geez, I don't really know how you get through life at all. So it's one of those things like if you know what a lean protein looks like, if you know what a healthy carb looks like, fruits, veggies, whole grains, if you know what healthy fats look like, avocados, olive oil, etc., there's a lot of mixing and matching you can do, and you learn how to put together good, healthy meals. Then you don't have to have a prescription. You can just have the generality and do super, super well. And I think because that offers flexibility and variation, it's probably the best approach for most people. You get unless you have a medical circumstance where a nutritionist has to literally tell you what to eat. I think most people will do really well with that kind of enough flexibility to get good variety in, but enough guidance, right? We'll say, you probably need this much protein per meal. And they're like, well, what if I eat 100 grams more than that? Well, probably shouldn't do that, So in the age of, if it fits your macros versus exact food prescription, I think there's a middle ground there that works really well for most people.
Yeah. Do you find that, Lonnie, when I know you've worked with clients every once in a while and have a lot more in the past, do you find that even though you're an RD, you probably don't use that to the extent you probably could, just because you find that it's not as useful, or what are your thoughts on that?
Well, it's one of the reasons I don't work with clients that often, frankly.
Yeah.
Because, we could do a whole episode just on sort of the nutrition care process, which is not just for medical stuff, but assess, diagnose, intervene, monitor. All these things were set down years ago now, because I think they wanted to standardize how dietitians practiced. You know, you'd get these old school dietitians that and again, I'm talking about the history now, but a lot of like coaches, like, oh, I've seen this for years, I do it this way, you know, or in my training, like at the Cleveland Clinic, I would write a SOAP note, you know, for a client. And again, that's a way to try to structure it: subjective, objective, assess, and plan. And then I would go down the hall to the GI floor, and after just getting down on the cardiac floor, and they'd say, "This is not how you do it. I do it like this." So there was so much variation that I think they tried to standardize it. Like I said, I'm not going to go off on a tirade. That's probably a show in itself. Even the list of nutrition diagnoses that we use, you know, they have a PES statement: problem, etiology, signs and symptoms. It's very structured, and it's very literature-based, and it's gone on for decades. You know, now the nutrition care process is a little bit newer, but still pretty established. So that's one of the things that makes me a little concerned is when I would work with, or if I were to work with a fitness client or someone in a sports nutrition setting, sometimes this system still applies, but it increases the responsibility in some ways. I guess what I'm saying is sometimes it's funny. After pursuing all of the necessary coursework and internship in hospitals and nursing homes and outpatient and WIC clinics and all these different things, I still find myself, when I talk to people, opting to just answer more generalized questions. You know, people like you tend to benefit from a scoop of whey protein after you lift. You know, or the science says this, or the science says that. Because for liability reasons, when I start to invoke a much more formalized process, you know, of assessment and all the things that go into that, you know, the medical history and drug interactions and all these other things, most people in the fitness world, they don't do that. They don't really follow a super structured process unless it's one they invent themselves. And I think when you try to invent yourself into these systems, you're just overlooking decades of established stuff, you know. But here I am starting to go off. So, but yeah, hiring dietitians would be one way to do that. But at the same time, I'm well aware I actually have much more interesting conversations with doctorally trained exercise phys people when it comes to nutrition than I do with a lot of, you know, entry-level or mid-level dietitians, because I don't think they have the same grasp of the physiology and how it interfaces with the exercise and, you know, the training principles and everything else. So,
yeah, at RP we don't for sure just hire dietitians with that training.
Yeah.
They have to have a long history of working with athletes, and really, I'm just going to go out and say it because this is a part of our hiring process. They have to be longtime athletes themselves. You can't prescribe sport nutrition well to your best if you haven't been there. I've seen it too many times. I'm sure you guys have too, where like they'll hire a fresh out of school nutritionist to do nutrition for a sports team, and they're like basically treating these folks like they're medical cases, and and it's like, well, you know, oh, they don't need any more protein than this and that, you know, according to this and that study. And you're like, well, first of all, your research is outdated because your professors are outdated the moment you enrolled in school, and second of all, like, geez, you just never been there before, and it's really tough to work with a population when you have just it sort of in the written terms you have the training, but it turns out you don't have any athletic experience yourself and you haven't worked with athletes before. That's a huge part of it. And I think a lot of people think registered dietitian, they think, oh, qualified to deal with any kind of diet. Well, qualified, yes, maybe in the technical sense, but are they going to be amazing at it? Maybe not. And I think a real solid candidate for doing a great job with nutrition prescription is a registered dietitian that has a lot of experience with their own nutrition and athletic performance and has worked with tons of athletes. Now that's a person that can do a good job potentially. Whereas if you just have the RD, or geez, if you just have the experience and not the formal degree, there's going to be stuff you're going to miss big time.
Yeah, that's what's so rare in the industry, frankly. I mean, I know we're running out of time here, but that's essentially what's so rare, is you get the people that do it, they're athletes, or you get someone who's more of a clinically focused dietitian, right? But rarely do they meet in between, you know, and they've got a little bit of, they've got perspective from both. So
you're telling me we try to hire these people. We have to do searches that go on forever, and we just hire no one.
Yeah.
They're like, all right. Who's going to work for us? And those crickets are like, okie doke. It's funny enough, anytime we post a position anywhere, we're like, okay, we're looking for an RD with weightlifting experience or sport experience and someone who's worked with clients before and such and such. And like, I'll get like 10 messages and be like, so I don't have my RD, but I like sports, even though I've never done them. I'm like, why are you? Thank you for reaching out. We'll stay in touch.
Yeah, and you know what, Mike? I think the reason for you get that partly is because in a lot of athletic training, not athletic training as a field, but in sports training kinds of settings, there's not licenses that have to be enforced, by the state government. Of course, it's a state-by-state kind of thing, but there's, like, you could be a coach and not necessarily be licensed in it, right? And don't get me wrong, a license alone, how many people have driver's licenses and they drive like idiots, So you got to be careful. I agree with that very much, like the experiential part. But I think that's kind of where a lot of this comes from. Like, people will say, Lonnie, you're so paranoid. I have to fill out all this paperwork before I even begin. Well, yeah, you have to realize this is regulated like, medicine, like dentistry, like other things like that. It's not the same thing, because in exercise science, we don't have licensure. We don't have to do things that way. A certificate is not a license. It's a different kind of setup. So I think it's very foreign to them that it has to be approached a little differently. That's all.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Last question as we wrap up. Obviously, you've got a lot of great experience with yourself and clients and a huge academic background, and you've seen all sorts of stuff, I'm sure, running the business over the years. What would you say is the number one mistake related to hypertrophy, and what would you do to change it?
Number one, man, you're putting me on the spot.
I know. Marco said I got to get some really good questions to you, or he's going to be mad at me.
I don't know anyone by that name, and I don't like that name. I got a shout out to Marcos. What up, Marcos? If you're listening to this, as a very long time friend of mine and a mutual friend of ours. All right. So anyway, mistake. Okay, I'll pick one out of a hat. I can't say it's the number one, but I'll say it's real. It's real gnarly. Assuming somewhere between assuming or hoping that hypertrophy is a short-term process and attempting to put in considerable amounts of effort that is over what I would say is your top threshold for sustainability of your own efforts for short times in order to try to realize results. So here's what I'm going to do that. Somebody is like, I want to grow muscle. And they're like, all right, here we go. You start rubbing your hands together and they're like, I'm going to eat this many calories, this many meals. I'm going to cook my own food. I'm going to train twice a day. They put together this gnarly, like Olympia prep kind of program. And the program is basically designed to fail within a month. Like, there's no way anyone short of an Olympian bodybuilder is going to be able to keep this up. And what they do is they burn themselves to the ground. After a month, they're like, fall off the wagon. I'm sure you guys have seen this with a trillion people before, where they're like, how's your program? Like, well, life got in the way, the wife, the kids, insert trope here. And they're just not doing it anymore. And a lot of times they're doing something much worse or much less of a degree of intervention, or they're doing nothing at all. And what I would really like to see them do instead is just put together some decent basics and stick to them. You want muscle size, it's not going to hit you in a month. Like, people, like, I almost like have like an allergy, like a psychological allergy to people be like, man, my gains in the last month. I'm like, shut up, stop. I don't care. Like, I don't care what your gains have been in the last month. I care about your gains over 2 or 3 years. But that's how long it takes to get much bigger. I care about your gains over 10 years. So what can you do? Don't have Napoleonic goals and plans. Don't try to overcommit to a crazy process you'll never sustain yourself through. Just eat good meals, get some protein in, live your life, good nutrition, good rest. Make it to the gym 4 or 5 days a week, maybe. Have a good logical program that is fun. Provide overload. Watch your body weight. Let it creep up over months and months. When you get too fat, cut down a little bit. Then let your body weight creep up again. After 2 or 3 years, you will be bigger. You might not be Marcos Rodriguez big, but you will be bigger. And then that will be how you get success. It's so many people, I'm sure, come up to you guys and I get this plenty at the gym. Like, they'll watch me do like close grip bench press with a tank top on, and I'll stand up and they're like, what the hell happened? Like, how do you get your arms like that? And I'm like, 20 years of training. And they're like, oh, you got to see the life flow out from their eyes. Right? And it's not a 4-week program. It's not a 4-week program. So I just, if I can imbue any sort of value to that way of looking at things, of stop looking at these programs. You guys remember reading like Flex magazine and Muscular Development?
Oh, yeah.
Great magazines, taking nothing away from them, but they got to throw the steak to the sharks every now and again. So it'd be like, your plateau buster program this month, and it's like, no. Just a good solid foundation taken over months and months and years. That's how you grow. It's not over a month. It's not over weeks.
Yeah, it was always I remember Lee Priest once saying, he's like, oh, crikey, if I have to do like another, 4-week arm training program, he's like, I don't even train my arms that much. They've always been big. You're like, oh, well, at least he's honest now. He doesn't care anymore.
He's very honest.
Yeah. Cool. No, I think that's super solid advice. Very useful. So where can people find out more about you and the company?
We're just disbanded the company. I've had it. It's so much stress, and who can really in this modern world?
Well, now you can spend all that time on your computer talking to other people.
Perfect. My dream come true. I'm just going to do a lot of plateau buster arm workouts back to back now with time. So renaissanceperiodization.com, because it's impossible to spell, you can just go on Instagram at RP Strength. Much easier. Hit the link and go straight to the website. Our Instagram's got cool stuff on it. My own Instagram is RP Dr. Mike, RP DRMIKE. It's pretty boring. My ability to take pictures of my food is that of a 4-year-old child. It's terrible. I get a lot of feedback. So if you want to make fun of really crappy food, I'll take a picture of a steak and it looks like a piece of poop, and that's just generally what you get on my Instagram. But there's a couple of informative posts around. Again, my Facebook, Mike Israetel on Facebook, is a public account. I do post quite a bit more information on there, and that's sort of the primary places to find me, and come, follow me, troll me, and we'll have a good time.
Cool. Awesome. Well, thank you very much for your time today. We really appreciate you being on here. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me on. It's an honor.
Hey listeners, have you seen the store at IronRadio.org? There are 3 halls in the store, one for Phil, one for Fortress, and one for myself, Dr. Lowry, and they're thematic. So you can go into our Halls of Iron store and choose based on your goal. If you need something to learn or read or something nutritional, you can look in my store, Lonnie's store. If you want something about injury prevention or competition, then take a look at Phil's Hall of Iron. And if you want something about motivation or daily training, Fortress's Hall has what you're looking for. There are some fun, heroic descriptors as you browse through the store, so we try to make it a little more fun than the average boring online store. And whether you're a novice lifter or someone more experienced, you can take heart that you're not wasting your time. The things that we put in each Hall of Iron are actually based on our own recommendations. Protein powders that we know to be good, knee sleeves, wraps of some kind, things that Fortress uses in his own training. The stuff you see, is good. This way you don't waste time. So check out the Iron Radio store at ironradio.org and let us know what you think on the forums, and certainly you can request products and we will screen them before they go in. So thanks for listening. Iron Radio is accepting donations. If you like what we do, the professors, the scientists, the bodybuilding show promoters, the athletes themselves in powerlifting and bodybuilding, please consider making a donation or maybe buying something from the ironradio.org store. We also are accepting supporting members. So for $4 a month, which is frankly less than the bank sneaks out of your account in fees, you can step up and support a form of sort of public radio for the bodybuilding and powerlifting and strength community. The Iron Radio podcast and all of the audio on ironradio.org is for informational purposes only. If you're interested in starting a diet or exercise program, it's important to check with your physician. Also seek the help of registered dietitians, athletic trainers, and qualified exercise physiologists in order to make the progress that you need.